Welcome to New Life Church at Home. A big thank you to those of you who have invited friends over to your house today and are being church at home together. We are about to do something that is not normal. It's a little different. And this is a follow-up message. It's part two of a message that I preached last week entitled Sit With Me. And we were addressing like racism and discrimination in our world and how a Christian should be responding to that. And one of the big takeaways was that as Christ followers, we are to be like Christ. We are to minister like Christ. And so if we look at the life of Christ and how he ministered and who he ministered to time after time after time, he would talk to people, he would befriend people, stoop down to minister to people, eat with people, heal people, invite people to follow him, sit with people, and listen to people who were marginalized and very unlike Jesus. Essentially, he took a stand by taking a seat. And so rather than just tell you what to do, like a lot of preachers do, I wanted to take it a step further. I wanted to show you what it might look like, maybe even model for you what it might look like to have an awkward conversation and to take a stand by taking a seat. So Katie and I, we sat down with another couple from New Life Church, a black couple, and had what many would call an honest and awkward conversation about race and about racism and discrimination. And so today, we're giving you the opportunity to be sitting in and listening in on our conversation. You may have noticed if you're on the YouTube live chat, you're like, it's not working right. I just want you to know it's not broken, it's intentional. And you'd be like, well, why would you shut that thing down? Honestly, it's in a world where it's so difficult for us just to sit and to listen, where so many people have lost the ability to just have a grace-filled, healthy dialogue. Now's not the time to comment. Now's not the time to build up an arsenal for an argument even. Now's the time just to sit and to listen and to love people enough to hear their hearts and to understand their experience. So, there may be some things that you're going to hear today in our conversation that you're going to disagree with. In fact, there are going to be some things that are going to be said that may make you feel very uncomfortable. And here's what I want to say to you. It's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to hold that tension on the inside of you even. In fact, Jesus never actually called us to be comfortable. In fact, if we really look at the life of a Christ follower, we're essentially supposed to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Micah chapter 6, verse 8 gives us three things that we are called to do and to be. He says to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly. So as you sit through this and peer in on this conversation, I want to remind you that this is not a call to support an organization or to defund another organization. This is simply a challenge to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. To sit. And rather than comment, rather than chat, rather than talk or deflect or defend, just to listen to our black brothers and sisters in our local church that are hurting. And so I'm so excited for this opportunity for us to be a part of something this huge. I want to introduce to you Lance and Natalie Gibbs. Natalie is an assistant professor of social work at the University of Southern Maine. She has worked in foster care and has her PhD in social work from Boston University. Lance is a lecturer in race and ethnic studies and also sociology at the University of Southern Maine as well. He has his PhD in race and ethnic studies from Bowling Green State University. And if you haven't had the opportunity, the pleasure of meeting them as a part of our local body of believers, they have been a part of New Life now for a few years. They have two of the most amazing children, and I'm excited for you to get to meet them, and I'm excited to invite you to sit with me as we sit together and have an awkward conversation. So you and I, we got together a couple days ago and just had a very awkward, frank, real, honest conversation about race and what's going on in our world today. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to maybe just have those same type of conversations together and invite other people into it. And honestly, guys, my hope and prayer is that we begin to model what it could look like in people's lives. And because I think
expectations that we have.
Well, this doesn't happen. This type of conversation doesn't just necessarily happen organically. And so my hope is that it bridges the gap for us and brings education and helps people understand what's going on. So I think we just can, get started. And there's a lot of polarization right now. Like, you just turn on the news and we're polarized as a nation, as a people, whether that's political, race, or otherwise, where we find that there's just, polarization everywhere. And one of the big things that's on the news are all these protests that are going on with Black Lives Matter. And we're hearing a lot of, there's Black Lives Matter, what about All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter and all of that. And so I guess as Christians, and as we're just kind of sharing this, as a church, how do you kind of help us to understand this whole Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, and what is that? Maybe you can help explain that for people that are maybe struggling with the Black Lives Matter movement.
So, I think there are a number of different ways that we've responded and that people typically respond. I think one of the reasons that we have this polarization and people, in response to Black Lives Matter saying All Lives Matter, is that we're not necessarily listening to each other non-defensively. We are listening with a ready response.
You already have your response to counter what's going on.
Yeah. And I think some people are hearing, when they hear Black Lives Matter, they're thinking that it means that other groups, and maybe specifically white people, that they don't matter and that, they're not significant. But that's not what Black Lives Matter is about. It's imagine that, I think one of the things that I saw recently that really resonated with me, particularly as a Christian, was, the story from the Bible where it talks about, the shepherd having 100 sheep and one goes missing, the sheep is lost and so on. And the shepherd's response is, he's distressed, he's distraught, and he's, wanting, really hyper-focused on finding that one sheep. And is he saying in his actions as he goes looking for that sheep that the other 99 are not important? They're not significant?
They don't matter.
No, he's saying, right now you're safe, you're okay, you're all together, but one of mine is lost or missing or possibly hurt. And I think that's what I hope people get from Black Lives Matter, that here's a group of people, a community that has gone through trauma.
Pretty much that's what we're talking about here, this group of people, Black people in the U.S., that's what's happening to them. So we're saying we have to focus on it. When you go into All Lives Matter, it becomes a rhetoric whereby you pretty much don't see, whereby there's something that is disproportionately happening to this group of people, of course, based on their skin color, which is why you have the Black Lives Matter. When you throw all of these things into it, you pretty much...
You're invalidating...
Yeah, you're invalidating their experiences and everything people. And what is happening to that group of people.
We need to listen. Understand. Yeah.
As I said, there's something going on.
Listen to understand, not listen
not to argue, to have a counterpoint.
Yeah, right.
And that's something that, like, our world has...
No, we don't listen.
We don't do well.
Yeah.
Like, we're just, most of the time, I even find it in myself. It's like when you're talking, I'm just thinking about how I'm going to respond.
Right.
I'm not really listening sometimes. I'm just listening for how you can counter
argue.
Yeah,
right.
that's all.
Yeah, and that's what it is. All Lives Matter is really a counter argument to Black Lives Matter, but not necessarily hearing that Black people don't feel like their lives matter.
And it's like me telling you, I like chocolate, and you turn around and you're like, you know, he prefers vanilla. I'm like, no, I didn't say that. I never said that. Why would you say that? You're like, no, you really like vanilla.
I've heard somebody say that, like, you can't say that all lives matter until Black Lives Matter.
Right.
That we're not negating one to support the other.
That's
Right.
And we're not even negating, you know, supporting our police officers or our fire department,
Right.
our people that are
That's what it is.
serving
Yeah.
That's not what
in
it
order
is.
to say that Black Lives Matter. We're not
Right.
saying that
That's
police
not
don't
what
matter. We're not
it's
saying that white
at
people
all.
don't matter. We're just saying
That's not what
there's
it's
some
saying.
people that have been marginalized, and
For a
it's
long
part of our
time.
responsibility
That's
to
it.
take a stand and
Right.
to care.
Yeah.
So obviously the kind of, I would say, tipping point that has kind of incited all of the protests and things like that were the recent killings of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And I guess I wanted to just, for you guys to be able to even share, like, when you saw that, and I think that video has been seen by almost every single person, right, in America. I mean, when I watched it, I still haven't watched the full tape. It's just too much for me. It just wrecked me, and to watch how that all played out. How did you respond when you guys first saw it?
Well, I think like you, I haven't watched all of it. I think I remember talking to a friend a couple days after, and I told her that I have to balance, you know, kind of remaining conscious about what's going on, being aware of what's happening, and allowing myself to feel some of those really tough emotions. But I also have to, you know, balance that with kind of preserving myself. And it's really a tightrope. I think especially for people in our positions, you want to feel, but oh my God, it's very traumatic. So I mean, I still get very emotional kind of thinking about it and have images in my head of it, but it's hard. That's not a good way of expressing it, but it's really hard.
When I saw it, I just shook my hands like, and I was angry. I'm like, again, really, because we're discussing Arbery's murder, and I was talking about how the guy, you know, chased him down and blocked him from his car, and I'm like, we haven't even gotten out of that fresh, and I'm like, so I was angry.
I think that tends to happen too. A lot of us think we kind of stuff our feelings because it's yet another
thing,
you know,
that's
example of how we're negatively
And
impacted.
when you say it's yet another thing, what makes you think that, like, why is this one exploding the way that it is? Like, why do you think that this is a tipping point right now? I mean, I'm sure it's a combination of things, but in your perspective...
It's a combination. The pandemic plays a role in this.
Yeah.
Everybody was at home and you could see it, and you weren't necessarily focused on your day-to-day life. Because what happens with the other ones, you've seen other videos, but persons have been up and about and it's like, well, I gotta run here, I gotta do this. Here you were forced to sit, and everybody was like,
had a captive audience.
What?
Yeah.
No, because now you see with the protest, we've seen more persons who are not people of color
Getting
in the
involved.
protest.
Yeah.
So everybody got to sit down and not necessarily run off to their lives.
Today, people, you know, we've had civil rights movement, laws have been passed. There's no longer, you know, separate drinking fountains or bathrooms or things like that. And so, from like a legal perspective, there's not any racism that's happening. So I guess you know, I mean, if you look at it overt. If you look at the legal system, you would say all men are created equal, and that would include black people at this point. So I guess what I would love to hear is, for you personally, not necessarily what's happened over the past 100 years or 200, whatever, but for you personally, how has racism affected you? How has racism affected your kids, your family? What give us some things that maybe it's not necessarily, like you said, overt, but you deal with or have dealt with in the past.
So I think legislation is one thing, like you said, but there is just, you know, everyday experiences. I remember one of the times that we lived in Ohio, and I was walking with a neighbor, and she got very upset because there was something that she was upset about in another neighbor's yard, and she decided that she was going to talk to them about it. And I had to kind of take a step back and let her know that I don't feel like I have the same privilege to call out a neighbor as she does, because I've had experiences where even if you live in the same neighborhood, people look at you differently as a person of color, as a black person. I'm very careful when I walk around neighborhoods that I've lived in, or the one that I live in now, not to, stare at somebody's house, because there are persons who would think that you are looking because you are trying to find something to steal. There are these stereotypes that are kind of put on people of color, on black people, that sometimes we internalize, and I think, there might be some paranoia, at least on my part, but I'm also very conscious of some of those images and ideas that people have, and I'm careful to avoid that. I know you talk about trying to be very conscious about not coming across as threatening, because there's this idea that black men are
it's and again, that's not new. And even though I know Pastor Justin is saying, you're not really looking at past 100 years, those things have been carried forward. It's not that they went away, because you can't legislate away racism, you can't legislate away hate, you can't, so those tropes have been carried forward. So as Natalie was saying, you're very conscious of what you do. Again, you get what we call microaggressions, whereby they're everyday little things like, your daughter is beautiful for a black girl, as opposed to, and you have those, or the ones whereby, as Natalie is saying, you check yourself. Because that happened to me before, jogging down the main street back before we moved here, and there was a white female jogging, and it wasn't like the street was empty. But you called the police, and told the police to come, because I was jogging, and she felt threatened. And the police came up to me, and he's like, listen, she feels threatened. I would like for you to, and of course, there's this thing also, the idea of, and I have white friends, and this one, but they can't do that.
That's illegal.
Am I right?
Oh,
and I'm like,
I think I said that the other day.
yeah, and I'm like, listen here, I'm just trying to jog and go home alive.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm like, so when the police said, I'm like, cool, like, yeah, we're good. And I took my butt somewhere else, not a street, went on jogging.
And you had mentioned that you don't.
Yeah, I don't jog around here. I go to a field. I would like to, but I don't. You have to be very conscious. This is where I think, once again, persons who are white have to understand in terms of the unearned privileges. These are things, you just jump, you want to go jog, you go jog.
Yeah.
I think through the entire process, I have to appear non-threatening all the time.
You have to think about it.
I
That's a
actively
conscious thought.
think about that all the time.
As parents, I think we are also very careful in the interactions that our kids have. I try not to make any assumptions about who is going to be receptive, like what parents or kids are going to be receptive to our kids playing with them. I've had, our daughter came home one day to say that one of her friends in her class that she wants to do a play date with said to her that you can't come to my house to play because my mother doesn't like brown people. So right away, I know that that's not a parent that I'm going to approach. Whether or not it's true, I don't know if her mother actually said that, but this is what this 5-6-year-old said. So I don't make any assumptions about how people feel. I generally don't approach people unless I know them or they've approached me first. I remember we did a life group with Pastor Tom and Melissa on parenting, and one of the we did like different activities over the period, and one of the weeks Pastor Tom asked us to in a public space, in a supermarket or whatever, go up to a stranger and say something about the gospel, and I
But it's thought about it too.
Yeah, and I'm like, let me rethink this one, Pastor Tom.
I said it openly. As a person of color, I don't generally just approach strangers because I don't like to be insulted.
Yes.
You know, I don't like feeling devalued.
No one
or,
wants-
And it's not
Yeah.
and it's not the idea that you can't go and preach. It's not that, but it's a response that you
Yeah.
get. Like I was in a supermarket with my younger brother. I remember the time, and the guy came up and called us both monkeys.
that you should go get bananas.
And you should go get yourself some bananas.
He
And-
said that to
Yeah, in the supermarket. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, and there are people around, and this is the other part, you know.
Yeah.
There are people around, and everybody's like, okay.
Nobody said anything.
Nobody said anything, and I'm like, oh, okay. So, you know, that interaction to kind of jump in, and I'm not saying we don't have positive interaction, but,
Yeah, but
it's
you don't
after
ass-
knowing
you don't
people,
assume,
but I
right.
don't, yeah.
I don't assume
I don't just,
people are going to be friendly. or
yeah,
open
I'm
to-
as open as I am, I'm kind of hesitant to just kind of,
yeah.
Right. Right.
So this is a good point. So there's people that are obviously overtly racist,
yeah, you have the over
and then there's
ones, I get
people
those.
who would consider themselves not a racist,
Non-racist.
right? Like I'm not gonna, you know, they're not
They're not going to
yelling
say
out
anything.
racial slurs.
Right.
Yeah,
They're not going to do
yeah.
anything. They're fine with people of color and all that. But then there's this, and part of the reason why we're even doing this is that there's this reality that there's a responsibility of complicitness in just remaining silent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether that was, you know, some of the people that were around George Floyd as he was being killed,
Yeah.
or that was people that were sitting around in the grocery department
Yeah.
listening to you being called a monkey. Like, I guess one of the things that I'd love to know is just like, as a person that has maybe been even complicit in, like, what would help in those situations? If somebody came to your aid, what would that look like? As somebody said, you know, maybe you should go get some bananas. What does that look like?
Speak out. I know I can
Speak
talk,
out.
but
Yeah.
this is the thing. We have to understand that the idea of racism, because we have to know and race and what it is. It's because there's this notion that there's a group of people who are inferior. The US is on a scale whereby whites are at the top, blacks are at the bottom. And, you know, on different days we kind of play around, given shade of skin color, who gets to get lumped in between.
Yeah.
That's how it is. That's just the reality. The persons with oppressed voices, they're marginalized. So even when they talk, it doesn't carry that weight because there's no power behind it.
Yeah.
They don't have that power. If whites speak out, that's when you see a shift, which is why we're saying when you see that in the protests
Yeah.
and you see prominent persons who are white, when they come out, it carries weight behind that. Because you take a step back, even if I speak out, it doesn't carry that much weight. But if somebody steps in and says, no, you can't say that, that's derogatory, that's racist, you find that what normally happens is that people check themselves.
There's a difference between being non-racist and being
Anti-racist.
anti-racist, and I think that's what more, you know, white people need to be allies in that process and be openly anti-racist and to call things out when they see, you know, whatever the injustice or the discrimination is, to call it out.
That's the only way it's going to change if
Yeah.
we have
I
those
agree.
allies. It's not going to change.
It's strange because we will come to the aid of a marginalized group of people on many other levels.
Yeah.
When it comes to child abuse. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not enough for you to just say, well, I'm not a child abuser.
I
Yeah.
don't agree with child
I don't
abuse.
agree with
Yeah.
child abusing.
Yeah.
I've never abused a child.
You'll
or
report
We're
it.
mandated
The
reporters.
bandit did report.
Right?
Yeah.
Or like bullying. You know, it's
Yeah.
not enough to be like, well, I'm not a bully. No,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we're called
Calling-
not
calling.
only just as human beings, but especially as Christians
Yeah.
to stand up for people that have been marginalized and lost their voice, which is why we are anti-child abuse, which is why we are
Well, and not only
anti-bullying.
are we anti-child abuse, but then we take those children and we really try to love them and
But we
give
don't,
them a
yeah.
place of security.
Yeah.
You know,
There's
Where we
follow
need to go.
through.
but you know what the big thing is? Simple. US has not come to that space to talk about race. We haven't. We've talked around it. A lot of persons have a whole lot to say about race, but we have not addressed race and racism in the US at all. And you said it a bit earlier. Some persons think that, well, since we've passed legislation,
right.
We fixed it.
we
It's
fixed
done.
it.
Yeah.
What's
I was
the problem?
like, no, we have not
Well,
even
I'm-
remotely close.
I'm wondering, and I know this is like probably a really large question, but I am wondering in your perspectives, like what kind of policy change would be like a hopeful start, or would be
Right. Apart from these conversations.
apart from these conversations, like I think that it's important to get the ball rolling, but it's the same analogy as like the kid who's abused, right? Like, yeah, you stand up and you take care of that child, but then you have to follow them for a long time to adulthood, right? So what kind of systemic change or what steps moving forward would be most beneficial in your opinion, or would help start moving in the right direction?
It's a big question.
I know,
Yeah,
I'm just really curious.
I mean, I think I can think of two main areas where Black people are kind of disproportionately represented or impacted in the school system, because of what we talked about earlier with redlining and Black communities being so different from white communities, where there's underfunding and poor education, and then poor jobs or low paying jobs and so on. We have this cycle going. But if we were able to better fund public schools that serve those populations, and maybe even not have a situation where we have that separation of schools that serve Black communities and schools that serve other communities, I think that would be one way of systematically changing the disadvantages that Black kids face. And then Black people, Black men in particularly, are disproportionately represented in the prison population, and not because of some of the myths that exist, because they commit crimes more or they commit more violent crimes. Those are those ideas are false. It's because they tend to get longer sentences, or because they tend to be poorer and can't afford bail and so on. So we need criminal justice reform. That would create some real changes.
But it's a way to ensure, once again, it's a systemic bias. How you created the prison system was by putting laws that would disproportionately affect persons. So when you had like the vagrancy laws, when they came about, those came right after you had slaves were free, but you needed to have back a particular workforce. Now they're free, you can't force them. So what do? You had the loitering laws and vagrancy laws. Anywhere you saw Black men congregating, you could actually take them back to prison and send them back on the plantations. So the laws served that. So we can't separate the biases that happened then from now and how they're enforced. And if you have persons who actually still think that way, I will look much older than I actually am. I will appear much violent than I actually am. When I'm not even doing anything, it's because you already have this idea of who I am.
So if obviously we've got people from New Life Church that are watching. I guess I want to. If there's something that the church could do, not necessarily just New Life Church, but Christians around the world could do to bring support and show love to this cause, what do you think that would look like? I mean, obviously we're called to carry one another's burdens, and so like what does that look like? What would you say to somebody that's saying, I'm struggling with this, I want to help, I just don't know what to do, I don't know how to be a support, what can I do as a Christian? And maybe it's small things, maybe it's large things, but like what would you say to somebody that's like, I want to do something, help me?
I think the first thing is just to listen. A lot of the fight has been just about hear us. So I think if we just listen, start with listening, and again, not listen to be defensive or
have an argument,
or to come up with a counter argument or to debate. Just listen to understand and really hear people's experiences over the years and the trauma that they've experienced.
Because even right now, as we're talking, like there are things that people that are watching right now, they didn't like to hear. Even now, and I find myself, even as we're talking, I'm just like,
that's not me.
That one hurt. I don't know if that one's true. And there's
but sometimes when something hurts, we really need to take a breath and realize that like we really are the ones that are in the wrong.
Why can't we just sit in that? Like sit in the
Be
awkwardness of it, and like
and
not have to feel like I gotta stand up and
us
say.
As human beings. That's the thing.
We're uncomfortable with being
even in the
a
church.
person,
Let's be real.
Yeah.
Even in the church, as he said it. It's for us. Everybody has a seat at the table. It's like No, we haven't. That's why the church is the most segregated spot in the United States on Sundays.
Yes.
The church that was supposed to be a safe space, when you ask people in the black community, especially, you talk about African Americans, they'll tell you it's the same church that they used to ensure that they enslaved us.
That's what they'll say.
And nobody wants to hear that uncomfortable truth,
Sure.
that the church in the United States was very much complicit in that. They're like,
We've got a shady background. Yeah.
Okay, a very shady background.
Yeah, come on.
But nobody does. They're like, And so you wonder why there's a split. And when blacks, even after slavery ended, they couldn't actually, and we're talking now the literal seat, they had to sit in the back of the church because they weren't seen as, no. And this is on the heels of saying we're all brothers in Christ, but you need to sit down here. But even that in its mess, in terms of that history, because the church in the U.S. with race and racism, that's a huge part, which is why, you have black churches and you have white churches. Yeah. That's why you look at, we have to get to that mess. We have to get down to that and strip it. And as you said, it's uncomfortable.
We have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
And we're not. And the church, I think that's where we need to start. If we can listen and then we start peeling back the layers. And as you said, I think then it would be easier for us to have those uncomfortable conversations. Because it's going to get, and it should get, uncomfortable. Christianity is not about comfort.
It's not about feeling good.
That's the other part that, to me, I'm
Mm-hmm.
always thinking, like, why are Christians like, no, if you're called to Christ, that's the most uncomfortable thing. You're called to be a radical. You're called to be like out of it.
Peculiar.
Strange. We use the word peculiar and it's a PC term. No, you're called to be somebody strange.
Yeah.
A deviant even. That's what Christ did. So when since did we just want to just sit down and just be okay in Christendom? And just be like, no, we have to dig. If we don't dig and get back, and as you said, we don't have to all agree. That's what makes us beautiful as well. We don't all have to agree. That we're not asking
there
for
that. There was a title of a book. If you want to walk on water, you got to get out of the boat.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Right, you got to get out of the boat. And I was sitting here thinking about how we like to walk, which means you don't just have on your dress shoes when you go out to take a walk, but you get your sneakers on. I'm like, are you going to walk in those? I don't think so. Get your stuff on.
Yeah.
We're exercising, and then when we walk, we talk. Meaning we're going to go beyond the surface.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling we need to add to the list of listen. We need to not just listen, but we got to listen.
Listen,
We got to get in it. Yeah.
I think the one thing that I would also add to that is to really look at who Jesus was and how he operated. And like I said, he wasn't
the worst of the worst. That's
radical.
who he was homeboys with.
Yeah.
One dude tried to chop off somebody's head and missed and got the ear.
Thank goodness.
Was not trying to get the ear.
No.
He was not. He was going for the head. All right, and that was somebody who Jesus was cool with. Like, that's my boy right there.
That's Peter.
And you look at the persons. Somebody who was. Bernie Madoff had nothing on him in terms of fraud.
Well,
Tax collector. No, Bernie Madoff couldn't touch them. All right? They were stealing the money left, right. Guys said, you know what? Let me come by your house so we can sit down and eat.
He invited himself over.
He's like, I'm coming up. And everybody's like, what, you can't? That's a criminal right there.
He's
like,
hang out with him.
That's my dude. That's who I want to hang with.
Yeah.
So we need to, as you said,
he provides the example.
The example is right here. You have to get in the messiness. You have to
comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That we're supposed to seek after injustice, seek after mercy, be humble. Like those things are. It's okay for us to get upset about those things, and it's important for these conversations because being a person with white complexion, I don't get those things aimed at me. And usually I don't hang around with people that would say things like that to people of colors.
Yes.
So it's outside of my earshot.
Of our bubble.
So when you tell me about racial slurs, I'm like, say what? Like that happened last week? Like, are you kidding me? There are people that are around that still say those things.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind. But it's important for us to.
But it's
hear
important
that.
to know that is more prevalent than we wanted to believe.
Yeah.
We need to know that.
Yeah.
And people need to know that.
And I would just say that, like, I think that now is the time for the church to take a stand by just calling out and being willing to wade knee deep into some of these conversations and not be silent about it. That it's not enough to just be non-racist, but that it's time to actually like say this is wrong, and it may be messy for me, and I may. Like I think of Jesus when the woman that was caught into adultery was thrown in front of him, and they were essentially trying to corner him, and say like, what do you say about her, right? And Jesus chose to love her, the individual that was in front of his face, at the risk of all of those people judging him by thinking that he's okay with that sin or whatever that was that stigma that was on her. And I think that like now is the time for us. What does love look like? It looks like looking at you long enough to see the pain and to say, I see you and I care about you, the person in front of me. Right. And I know that people around may misjudge me that I'm by saying I love you, that I'm hating police officers, or by saying that I love you, I don't love everyone. And it's like, no, I'm just saying I see you, and I love you, and I want to show you that.
That's hard.
I would love for the church to rise up to do that.
It's
boldly love people.
I know, I hear and I understand when you say that. I know it's going to be hard.
I know.
Because again, that's who we are as human beings.
Yeah, but if we're following Christ's example.
Justin got a word from a member of our church, Roberta. And I don't know the whole word. I would probably completely botch it if I tried to reiterate exactly what it was. But there was a portion in that word that really stuck out to me and stuck out to you. And it was it was sort of a dream, and the Lord in this dream said, this is the Greenfield
solution.
The Greenfield solution. And she's like, I don't know what that is. So she, like any good holy person, Googled it.
Of course.
Which I was so glad that she was so holy that she Googled it. I was like, it's totally what I would do.
Greenfield. That makes sense.
What was the I'm going to mess it up. What was the definition of the Greenfield project?
The Greenfield solution.
Solution. See, I'm missing it.
Is whenever there's like in different arenas of life. So in building, if you're in construction, it's essentially where you take an untapped piece of land and you build from scratch. If you're talking about industry, it's finding a niche that has
never been done. Okay.
If you're talking about technology, the Greenfield solution is not building upon previous technology. It's literally building from the ground up.
Almost
so it's
like
it's new.
So when you were talking about the church was part of the problem in the very beginning to enslave people or to keep people segregated or to keep people demoralized. And this has never been done. This could be your Greenfield project.
Solution.
Good Lord, I can't even say it correctly. I feel like the Lord is saying it's time to be the church and follow Jesus's lead and not be looking in Scripture for what I want Scripture to say, but looking in Scripture for directive from the Lord and to hear from Him. Yeah. So
I have no hope for anti-racist work outside of the church.
Outside, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because then we'll just be talking. We'll be back to when Martin Luther was going over the bridge of Selma.
Yeah.
Outside of the church?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge. Well, thank you guys for taking some time and sharing.
Yes.
And I pray that this conversation is the beginning of more conversations that happen, not necessarily in this house, but in houses all over the place. That people and families and kids and parents would discuss this and talk about it, and be willing to reach out and to befriend people that aren't like them, and to listen. All right. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it.
It's really
This is
good.
No problem.
I'm excited about it.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah, for giving us space to talk.
I want to thank you for sitting and listening today. I think one of the things that Natalie said at the very end was one of the greatest takeaways for us today. And it's just been echoing in me. And I'm going to quote her. This is what she said. I have no hope for anti-racist work outside of the church. My goodness, that's a heavy statement. That's a heavy statement because it puts a lot of onus, not just on white people or black people, but the work of Christ in and through the local church. Friends, what does that mean for you? My prayer, as you've been listening, is that we would realize the opportunity, the window of opportunity that has been opened before us, and that we would choose to take a stand by taking a seat, that we would choose to build bridges rather than walls. May we stop waiting for politicians or celebrities or journalists to see what they're going to do or say, when we know, as Christ followers, as Christians, that we are called to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly. Now is not the time for the church to be sleeping through the alarm clock. Now is the time to be like the sons of Issachar, who understood the times they were in and knew what it was that the Holy Spirit was calling them to. So here's what I want to leave you today with. Here's what I want to challenge you with. Have an awkward conversation. Maybe that's with somebody of a different color than you, or maybe that just means as a family you sit down and discuss what you just heard. Maybe if you've got people over at your house today and you just say, you know what, let's just talk about this. Let's take an opportunity as we eat lunch or eat dinner together. But as a family, as a church family, let's process what we just heard and find a way to be a part of the Greenfield solution. I love you, and I pray that you didn't just listen, but that you heard. God bless you. Have a great week.